Hello, everyone. I'm Rob Reagan, and thank you for attending today's webinar on AI and LLM security. I'd love for anyone that brought any questions to feel free to put them into the Q&A section, and we'll check in periodically throughout. Or as we get into the discussion further, if you have any questions that pop into your head, please don't be shy, and we'll check in on them and get to probably the majority of them towards the end. With that, let's get into meeting our panelists today. We have Damien Haas and Emily Choi Green, and we also are going to learn more about them at first, and then a little bit about where they work, and then we'll dive into the main topic. With that, Damien, what led you? What choices in life led you here to an AI security webinar? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Don't be humble.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks, Rob, for having us here. Really appreciate it. So a tiny bit about myself. I joined Moveworks about 2 years ago. This was before GPT was a thing. To be fair, and quite honestly, I joined Moveworks because I saw the power of what a proper bot can do, how you can actually assist, take action, and do things on behalf of customers, right? And for me, that was pretty powerful. And before here, I worked at Amazon for 9 years. Before Alexa was a thing, I was there when things kind of got started and making it a reality. So I have some experience on the ML AI space from there. So anyways, so it's an exciting space. And there is a lot going on, and a lot of innovation continues to happen from the technology as well from the security and privacy aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. Emily, please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been working my entire career with language models. I started working with Alexa's natural language understanding organization and kind of grew to support security for the entire Alexa AI organization. And when Damien, actually, we worked together at Amazon. So when Damien told me about the opportunity to really help take Moveworks to the next level from a data security and privacy perspective, I was super excited to jump on board. So I've been at Moveworks for a little over a year now, and also joined some of the huge launches in GPT-3 and GPT-4. So it's been super exciting to see the changes in the landscape and being part of a startup that is able to adapt to those new technologies so quickly.
Thank you for that. I'd love to get both of your opinions on what it was like, maybe a little bit more on like the history of MoveWorks.ai and their mission and the technology, specifically because it was always an automation forward company. It was always embracing machine learning from the start. And I think there's some differences between the different types of machine learning applications, different types of models. Help the audience understand what it's been like from where you were versus where you are now and where you think you're going next.
So to answer that, Rob, I think it's important, even though people are thinking that machine learning, it's like, oh, now we are in the inflection. But in reality, there's a lot of work that has happened way before GPT and what we see today on the news. And when I look at Moveworks, there's a dedicated machine learning team that focuses on this area, that actually makes the magic happen behind the covers, right? And within that, it's the first key piece of tech that is needed. It's NLU, NLP, kind of natural language understanding, natural language processing. So when we speak, there is terms that we use. So how would the machine learning aspect be able to understand what we are saying? And that was a heavy emphasis of the company even before I joined, right? What is the person saying? But then on top of that, there is a specific terms that somebody might use. And I'll give you a very simple example. If you go today on the street and you ask somebody, hey, I need a loaner, most likely the person is going to think about it. Oh, you need a car loan, right? That's the rental place over there. But in reality, on a company, on a corporate setting, it means you want a laptop. So being able to train the model in a way that can understand the terminology that we use, it's key. And more importantly, you are using it in the context kind of where MoveWorks gets deployed within the Microsoft Teams or Slack. So you just interact with it the way you interact with others. You don't have to get out of our way. So being able to put the right integrations, the knowledge, being able to go and retrieve the information that the people are trying to do or use, and even take action. Hey, add me to this distribution list, right? It's just all of that is the beauty, and I kind of fast forwarding from trying to understand what the person is saying, but then being able to take action as well, and putting in all of that together.
Do you have anything you want to add to that, Emily?
Yeah, so I think that starting this company at a time, right? It was started in 2016, where chatbots were these very brittle, often pretty deterministic things, right? Where think about like some of the chatbots we still have today, right? Often airlines have these where it's kind of saying like, hey, here's a question, you have to select options A, B, or C, right? That was where MoveWorks was started, is in this world where that was the only really type of chatbot that existed. You did have things like Alexa and Google Assistant that were pushing the envelope there, but it was still, everything was very rigid. And so as time goes on, the beautiful thing about being part of a company where it is AI forward and we're pushing the envelope as much from a machine learning perspective is that every new technology that comes out in research papers, in open source communities, we're immediately jumping on to adopt to that. And not every bigger company is able to make those quick steps. And so we went from a world where we're competing really with these legacy players in the space, like ServiceNow, and getting towards a place where there's a lot of people now running into this space because of the GPT-4 launch, but we were already ready to compete on that level because the moment GPT-4 was launched, we're like, okay, how do we get that? How do we use that? How do we build our own large language model that can do some of what we want to do even better than GPT-4 can? And so I think that's really where MoveWorks has had this great advantage and has been a very exciting place to work.
Yeah, that's fantastic. There's this old ACM article that I'm a big fan of that is titled "Manual Work is a Bug." And I think that if we can engineer ourselves out of doing the tedious things, the boring things, the things that shouldn't take as long as they need to, that's a win-win for everyone involved. And I know especially anyone that's ever had to do a help desk or IT support ticket has sometimes wished things went a little bit more smoothly or quickly. And for the most part, I think a lot of them can be automated.
Yeah, one more thing to add, Rob. I don't know, we probably have all experience that you need to find information within the corporate environment, and who knows the answer, right? I mean, I remember having to reach out to our HR partner because I just honestly didn't know where the information was. And now I can, for the most part, rely on MoveWorks to be able to get the information that I need and quickly. So I'm not frustrated, right? It's just being able to improve that employee experience from my point of view. So you have what you need at your disposal, and you can just keep doing what you were expecting to do, right? So.
Mm-hmm. So there's no doubt in my mind that this is valuable, that this is useful, and I'm very optimistic and try to remain pragmatic that we'll keep iterating on versions and it'll get better and better. Let's talk about some of the challenges, though. Let's talk about security risks. Let's talk about maybe a little bit about what your team has experienced through your journey. But I want to start with two issues in particular that I've been hearing from some of our other customers that plague them the most, and I'd love to get your thoughts on these. Those two issues are availability and cost. Availability, I guess, also would include latency, and these are, maybe not the things that are in the forefront of a lot of security professionals' minds, but I think they kind of intersect with like the site reliability engineering side of the world. And I'd love to hear your perspective on availability and cost. How does Moveworks manage those?
Yeah, so the thing that I can share, it's new tech. With new tech, there's new challenges, right? When you expect to be able to interact with a bot and be able to get a response quickly, right? The same speed that ideally a human engages, understands, and gives you the information. Today, what I can say, that has been one of the areas that we've been spending, and we give credit to the machine learning team, spending significant amount of time to figure out how can we make sure that our product responds quickly enough so the customer gets the information that they need. But in some cases, as we know, they either, with some of the sub-processors that we work with, things are not there. So the advantage, one of the things we have done, we are able to determine, hey, if things are degrading, let's switch to some other provider, or let's switch to our own machine learning model, right? And that has helped us being able to keep the right availability in check. I don't want to make it sound that we have solved everything and it's a walk in the park. We're still going through that and understanding what are the challenges and how can we overcome them, right? Having our dedicated instance, etc. But nevertheless, it's an ongoing work and effort that we're doing on
Keeps the
that.
SRE team employed.
Yeah. And I think that from not just availability, but from a latency perspective, a lot of when you think about user perceived latency, it's about setting the expectation for a user, right? There's different ways that you can signal to the user that you are working on this request in the back end, and that with this new technology, it's going to take you a little bit more time maybe to get that answer. And so one of the ways that we have kind of thought about this problem is giving these kind of status updates saying, hey, I understand your request. First of all, I know that what you're asking for. The next step would be, now I'm searching in our knowledge base for this request. Now I've found 3 articles. Now I'm summarizing them. And so to be able to kind of give that user the real-time feedback of the steps that we're going through to answer that request, you're not just sitting there waiting, being like, did my Slack message send? Why has it been 10 seconds since I've gotten a response? This is supposed to be automated. If you get those check-ins, you're like, okay, I get it. You're working on it. And this is still a lot faster than a human. So I'm okay. And I think that
I love that. I love that you said that user experience is a big part of addressing these challenges. You could throw more compute at it. You could throw, every technical approach to this, but there's some element of design that I think is important. Like you said, we're used to our search engine queries like being responded to like that, but this is not the same as a search engine. This is a whole other level of information retrieval, and sometimes information foraging, and sometimes refining with more context. And that might not be instantaneous, but it'll still be faster than if you had to do it the old-fashioned way. That's great.
And Rob, one other thing, building upon what just Emily stated, it also gives transparency to the user, so the user actually can see what is happening, and they can understand what is happening, right? The other advantage, potentially, then ended up, hell, those 3 resources, wait, those are not the right resources. So it's like, okay, there is more information there that can be done down the line if needed to refine it. Why were those surfaced and whatnot? So there is that avenue from a transparency perspective that the user can understand what is happening.
Yeah, I think that transparency and explainability of the AI decisions are going to remain very important topics for the foreseeable future. And I don't think that anyone will have solved that. It will always just be us constantly improving on it. It is, I agree, very key, because people just often assume that they tried it, it didn't work right, and then they move on. But I'm even trying to adopt this own philosophy and principle that it's just a tool, and if it didn't do what I expected on the first try, I might just be using it wrong. And this ability to give additional context, or to like give have like a user feedback loop and say back to the not only the system, but maybe the engineers that maintain the system, and product management, and so forth, that hey, this could be better, or this didn't work as ideally as I would have wanted it to, and then to be able to accept that feedback and either on the fly adapt and overcome the challenge, or build it into the next version. If we move into maybe some of the other top issues, and one that I think comes to mind is the difference between like a discriminative versus like a generative models issues. Like maybe if you could expand on, because I believe your team uses both types of machine learning. So what has been the different challenges that you face with each of those?
Cool.
Yeah. So I first, like, for, I don't know how much background everyone on the call has, but when we think about a machine learning model, it's something that takes an input and processes it and creates an output. And there might be a lot of different reasons that you want that input output transformation, right? So a discriminative model is about taking the input and classifying it, putting it into one of a discrete set of buckets. That could be a intent classification. What is the intent of this sentence? What are they trying to say? They are trying to get a Zoom license. They're trying to look up their benefits. That would be an intent classification. You also have discriminative models that are like binary classifiers, yes or no. You have discriminative models that identify key entities, like, hey, the key entity in this sentence is that I'm looking for workday, or that I'm looking for my paycheck. So those are all discriminative models. Discriminative models have existed for a long time. They are not, like, when we think about large language models can do discriminative tasks, but what has been so exciting has been the generative portion of this, right? And generative is basically saying, I understand the language and I can use it to generate brand new text. And that new text could be a summarization, it could be a rephrasing, it could be taking disparate, like, in knowledge that has been ingested in that language model, like base knowledge, like, the world map, or for us, like, it would be something like a user roster that's an internal knowledge source, and then using that to generate content based on that information. So that would be like the major differences, and they do have very different security risks.
The one thing to add as another example, one of the things that we did, and this is not something that we are advertising widely necessarily, because we did it internally. As a SaaS company, you have questionnaires that you need to fill out from other potential prospect customers and whatnot, right? So they give you these questionnaires, you have to fill them out. Usually the questions are similar, but they're not always the same. So going back to the generative model example, that's a perfect case, or where we ended up pulling all of our content, and today we empower the sales team to be able to ask questions straight there. And guess what? We give you the responses back, but we give you the citation. So you can go and click back and look at what is the source of truth of that. So that's the beauty of what you can do with generative model. And in that context, to be fair, it's not just, oh, you're using just one model for that. No, because we need to go search for the content. So we're using the discriminative models, and then we use the generative models to just generate the output. So in this case, it's not that you're using just one language model. You use multiple depending on what makes sense that what you're trying to do. And then from there, ended up producing your output. In our context, I mean, literally, it was just a couple of days ago, somebody said they had several questions and they just put them all together. And then our bot was able just to reply to all of them, and obviously kind of citing, responding to each of the questions and citing that. So we used the generative to get the output, but the input of that was ingested from our search capabilities, being able to rank those, identify what has the right answers, and then from there being able to produce the output. So just give you a little bit more background on how we've been using the product internally as well.
I think that's really impressive. I think to have a framework that uses different types of models for different problems is definitely seems to be the more mature approach. In my limited experience with building systems, I did find that I'm like getting better results if I try to ask one question or one simple task. But the fact that you've been able to mature your system to the point that it can handle a whole list of to-dos is certainly, I think, impressive, and I'm sure came with lots of challenges. The probably one of the most common issues I'm hearing about that folks are having or planning to at least mitigate the risk of is data poisoning. I'm curious if you could give any insights that your security team has had to embrace for mitigating the risk of data poisoning, especially, in my opinion, unintentional data poisoning is going to be a lot more common than intentional data poisoning. And then maybe things like overfitting can also become a problem. So if you could expand on how Moveworks has addressed those, I think it would be really helpful for our audience.
Yeah, definitely. I think that data poisoning can kind of come up in a few different places in the pipeline as well, right? You have traditionally what people think of as data poisoning would be something makes it into the training data set that inherently changes the way that the model behaves. And that form of data poisoning is something that it exists, but it's not super common. And the big reason why is when you think about a large language models, these are trained on millions and billions of text. So you would have to have a pretty large percentage of that content be poisoned in order to influence the model's behavior itself as we think about hyperparameter tuning that model, right? Where I think that data poisoning does exist is when you think about how the model then responds to a given question. So we talked a little bit about one of the capabilities is in searching internal knowledge sources and surfacing them back to the customer, right? So a model that's good at searching internal data sources and finding the right thing and returning it back, that might not be poisoned, but the internal data source might be accidentally poisoned. And what I mean by that is this has now made data so much more discoverable, right? You're able to find things so much more easily, and you can find things that were written within your company that were wrong. We've actually found a lot of customers that have said, hey, this made me realize that a bunch of my knowledge base articles were actually incorrect because the bot would respond with my article and someone would follow it and it wouldn't work. Or it also made me realize that there's access control issues with my knowledge base because we follow the access control that has been set by the company. So if the company says Emily's allowed to access this knowledge, we surface that to Emily, right? But they're like, hold on, Emily's getting a bunch of knowledge answers that she's not supposed to get. So I'm actually finding that this bot is making it very discoverable for me to find out where I need to update my own access control parameters. And so
you're making me want to use Moveworks as a pen testing tool.
Yeah, it's been cool to see kind of this side benefit, right? Of like that was always an access control gap, right? But the bot makes it so much more discoverable that you're able to say, hey, this information is getting surfaced. And so that's where I see like a lot of that unintentional kind of like data poisoning, where there's a lot more resiliency to data poisoning and overfitting. And so overfitting is when you have a training data set that is very biased to specific examples, or when you train and you tune your model, you're evaluating it on very similar data to your training data. And so you're saying, hey, this model must be great because it's doing the task that I trained it to do really well, but it's not able to generalize to a broader version of this problem. And so that's what overfitting would be. And so the best way to prevent against overfitting, right, would be a broad set of training data and a broad set of evaluation data. But again, we see with large language models that this is less and less of an issue because the fact it's large, because there's so much data, you're able to have less of that concern as you do with some of the smaller models that have been like in play in the past.
A couple of things to add to what Emily just stated. One of the areas that we have built our product on has been on grounded knowledge and truthful knowledge, right? In essence, we want to make sure that the responses that we provide back are valid, are real. So there is our own knowledge material that we have built based on how companies operate, information that they need, and that it comes from trusted sources. There's always a risk. I don't want to make it sound that we have solved it, right? But it's coming, for example, if you have questions around Microsoft Teams, we ingest the content from Microsoft themselves. We don't go and just try to search random material on the web, as well as whatever specific information you have within your company. So we consider that to be valid knowledge. Now, and now we surface that back to the employees. What can happen though? Let's say that we've had all experiences. We go into a KV article, we look at it, and information it's inaccurate, right? So that one is not so much a data poisoning, but it can have that side effect. But because we surface that back, people can click on it, they can see it. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is the source. Oh, I see. So that's where it's coming from. And I was like, okay, I can go and then take action and say, hey, that's the incorrect article, needs to be updated, whatever else
Right.
could be.
It's almost like an unintentional realization that we've automated a way of retrieving information, and it's unintentionally not the right information. It's unintentionally not factual. Maybe it's just out of date. I know one of the biggest problems with knowledge bases in general is who maintains them and who keeps them up to date. And maybe we have a new tool for automating finding out when something is out of date, and our user base, or employees in this case, are interacting with it. Therefore, we need to make it a priority to update it.
Yep.
I think that's really interesting. I did want to address a question from the audience. We did get asked if this one comes from Darren. Do any of the tools offer the ability to ask why the tools gave that response? For example, if I asked for information about something and I felt the response missed my question, could the tool explain how it came to the response? My immediate thought for this is I would first try to revisit my prompt or revisit how I asked the question. If I got back something that I felt was not what I desired, I would try to provide additional context, or I would try to frame my question in a way that incites the type of response that I want. And I may even ask the system that I'm interacting with to show its work and to describe why it answered the way it did. And if you're using something like a foundational model, I think this can work pretty well. There's some primer prompts that you can even save in your settings in like some of these systems that say always respond back with questions and be consultative in the way that you answer me, so that if I feel that the answer I got wasn't accurate, I can give you more context. But I'm curious, like Damien or Emily, what do you think about this?
Yeah. So I'm going to go build upon what Emily stated earlier on how our bot operates, because as I said as well, we rely on several large language models to give the right information back to the user, right? So what we do, and she mentioned this during the latency aspect, being able to explain what is our product doing. Oh, you're looking for X. And so let me see if I can come with a good example. Who are the direct reports for Joe, right? Something generic. So in that case, like, first of all, the bot needs to understand, okay, what does the direct reports means? And then from there, it will needs to go, it's like, okay, Joe, and there may be more than one Joe on the organization. So who are the various Joes in the organization? So all of that, as our product operates, it goes through each of the steps to be able to explain what we are doing. Now, does it always get it right? Is there a chance it might not get it right? I cannot come up with a good example, but yes, there's cases where it might not get it right. And in those cases, it's like, okay, what was it? It ended up looking for maybe Joe. Okay, I cannot have a good example, but maybe the word that was used, it could be in reference to a conference room, or it could be in reference to a human. So, or maybe to the printer name, whatever else, right? So maybe the same term was used in different places. And in this case, maybe it's going for knowledge rather than for the people, right? So yes, but would you be able to see that within our product? You can. If we're talking about in generalities from a machine learning aspect, right? I think it goes back to what you were stating around changing your prompt, right? What did you ask, right? The other aspect that can happen as well, you might ask the same question multiple times and you're going to get a slightly different responses. You're not going to get the exact same response again, right? So, and that's just because it's just how the models work. It's not meant to give you exact same response. Humans, we don't give you an exact same response all the time, right? Maybe if it's just a yes or no, that's maybe easier. But anyways, I know, Emily, is there something you want to add to that?
Yeah, and because it's a probabilistic system, right? So it's not deterministic. You don't know with that input, you always get output. It's all based on the probability. What's the probability of that next word? I have actually found, kind of in addition to Damien's comment about like how we show our work at MoveWorks, even with off-the-shelf tools like GPT, I found asking the model to explain its work can sometimes be way more insightful than the end product. And I actually personally find this with rephrasing or rewriting. When I say, hey, can you rewrite this email for me? Its rewritten email is always not quite what I want. And I've never have been able to figure out why. But then I was like, explain your work. Like, why did you choose to rewrite it this way? And they went line by line telling me what it felt was wrong with my initial sentence and what it was trying to go for with its new revised sentence. And I actually felt like I learned way more from that experience than I would have from copying and pasting its rewritten piece. So I do think like it's something that we should hopefully will have even better and better over time, not just showing our work, but being able to say, hey, I'm a human, I can reason, I know this is the step where you got it wrong. Like I can tell. So for example, our bot recently got this wrong for me, which I thought was funny. I've been asking when people started at MoveWorks. I'll be like, hey, when was Damien's start date? And then I was asking like, when is my start date? And for some reason, it didn't look up me in our people registry. It looked up start date in a knowledge article. And it surfaced back a Notion page that someone else took from their onboarding notes that said like, my start date is. And so they were like, Emily, your start date is a date that I did not start at MoveWorks. And I was like, I see what happened. And then I said, what is Emily's start date? And they gave me the right answer. And so I was like, I see what happened here. And I wish I could click and be like, hey, bot, this is where you went wrong. I see what step it happened. And hopefully eventually there'll be that way of having like an emoji react or saying like being able to give that type of feedback. And sometimes I've found that some off-the-shelf tools, you try to give them that feedback and they say, no, I disagree with you, which I personally find so human-like from them. So yeah, I think like it's a great question. Explainability is a huge component to trust in a system. So it's something that, I think we're all working to get better at. And
I love those examples. And yeah, there's whole entire algorithms dedicated to better explainability. And I think of this a joke that a friend told me. I guess he was joking, but maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe while like you've been fine tuning these models to help you rewrite your emails, but then when you asked it to explain, like it kind of course tuned you to maybe even become a better communicator in your first draft of emails as like why you're thinking through these problems. And I think that's really powerful, just as far as like something that can augment our abilities. The other example that you gave, I really want to touch on because it made me think of social engineering engagement where we were tasked to try to get the help desk to reset a password. And they had added to the process that you needed to know the start date of the employee to reset their password. And we rapidly found someone that had just started a few weeks ago and posted their Facebook notification that this is, start a new job at company X. And it was easy for us to retrieve, but it might be innocuous that like a system might be able to retrieve someone's start date, but it depends on that company's specific security processes if that's a data leakage or not. And so I'd love to shift topics to your thoughts on data leakage and how you address those in your security design, which is going to be challenging because every organization may have specific business requirements and then specific security objectives that map to those business requirements. So, what are your thoughts on the data leakage risks?
I think. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Emily. I want to tease something out before we go into data leakage, and because I think the example that you highlighted, being able to reset someone's password, right? So I put that in particular under the confused deputy attack area. So I want to tease it out. We can go into data leakage, but just want to take a minute or so on this one. On our product, we don't let the AI ML aspect to make a determination on who you are. We don't do that. Okay, there's no probabilistic around that at all. That is deterministic. It comes from your user identity, and we take action on behalf of the user identity that comes from that. So in essence, could you go and reset somebody's kind of arbitrary password or take action on that behalf, or even accessing content that they're not meant to? The reality is not. It's not possible. So from my perspective, that's a key aspect. If you're allowing the AI ML to take over and potentially take actions on behalf, what are the right safeguards? What is the risks that you're willing to take? We don't do that here. I'm not saying that, oh, nobody's doing that. No, but you need to really understand what is the risks, right? If you're empowering the AI ML to potentially do admin-like things, right? Like it could parse your email. If it parses your email, what does that mean? And what if there is a prompt injection thing in there? Anyways, not trying to deviate too much from the data leakage question, but I think it does matter. You need to understand the risks. You need to understand what are you willing to do based on the capabilities and take it from there. So it's a worth discussion to have and decide, okay, what's the level? What's my threshold, right? And each company may be different. Each person may be different, by the way, as well. So with that, we can go back to data leakage, but I just wanted to touch on that a bit.
Yeah, and I think as a final piece on that, like basically the model that you want to think about with the tool of a language model is that you are, again, translating language into another form of language. So one of the great ways to do that when you think about calling backend systems is that you're translating my input request into a very specific like API call that I want to make, right? But you're not making that API call. You now know, okay, I can call a plugin, I can call a downstream system to make this call. And if it's a call that I don't have the permissions to make because the identity is tapped in, and at that point, like downstream, it's not part of the language component, then it'll return it back as if you're resetting your own password. So it'll be like, I want to reset Emily's password. And it'll be like, great. What we understand is we're making a reset password API call. And it tags on like the right permissions of it's Rob that's saying this, and it'll just reset your own password. So that is kind of where I would think about it from the confused deputy attack, like the difference in who's doing what. Like the large language model is really language understanding. And all of these models are really saying, how do I do this in language? And you can write, like code is all written in human readable and machine readable language, but the whole point is to kind of translate that. And so that's the same with having a large language model write code for you. Like it's translating it into another language, but you shouldn't actually have it click execute.
Right. It's and I think you both touched on something that I firmly believe is you should not have a AI making security decisions for the AI, especially the same AI.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, and then from the data leakage perspective, like the type of data leakage you're talking about is a security team saying that what you know is something that's public information. Like that's not a private way to reset someone's password,
of
right?
course, it's a flaw in the process from
Yeah.
the get-go.
And so that's not on the AI, that's the problem. It's like, and that's not even true data leakage from an AI perspective, right? Because like data leakage from an AI perspective is normally saying like, I use this data to train an AI model and they're now somehow returning that training data to me, right? Like that's generally what we think of as data leakage.
And humans make these mistakes too, because the other piece of data that you needed to reset the password was their social security number. And don't even get me started on the problems with people having to call in and tell their social security number to the help desk support person. But eventually we just kept pressing and trying to coerce them into letting us reset a password. And they're like, I can't, it's a technical control. I need your start date and your social security number, and the social security number you're giving me is wrong. Why don't you try calling finance and see, like, maybe they have entered it into the system wrong. I know you're a new employee, like maybe they can fix it. And so we did. We called finance and we asked the finance person, hey, can you read back for me my social security number? Can I see what you have there? Because I don't think it's right. And they did. And then we called help desk back and then we reset the password. But if an AI had access to like an employee's social security number, an attacker might try the same type of techniques to coerce it into giving up something that it shouldn't give up. And I think that's the type of data leakage that
you're looking for. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of that's on like, what are your security policies that you're allowing your bot to read? Like, and what is that downstream implication, right? Like, is it considered a data leakage if you're choosing to let the AI, like, is that desired behavior or undesired behavior, right? And so if they connect it with finance and they say, okay, we're going to support you asking for your social security number in this program, like that's on the security team of that company to be like, that is not appropriate usage.
That's a flaw in the design. Maybe they didn't do a proper architectural security assessment or proper threat model to understand that we should not be even allowing that to be a possibility, and we should put controls in place to mitigate the risk of that, because an attacker is going to try to extract the social security number. We should expect that attack. We should have our system in a default configuration where it mitigates the risk of that.
Yeah. And we have all the disclaimers and we say, hey, don't put it in. But there's only so much that you can do as the AI platform to say, hey, this is not data that we want to be processing. At some point, it's also on like the application security team at the company to say, I will make sure that I'm implementing this.
I'm curious, like, how can differential privacy techniques from your perspective be used to mitigate this risk? Or Damien, I think you had a comment as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on from a risk perspective on this area about resetting the password and whatnot. One of the things that I've seen. So if we go back in time, people assume social security numbers were safe, were secure. In reality, the landscape has changed. And things will continue to change. So whatever we assume it's okay today, it will not be okay in a few years. So it's not because we say, oh, it's fine, then we should ignore it. I think we need to continue to revisit that. Today, I think social security numbers, they're no longer secure. It's just, unfortunately, there have been so many breaches. It's out there somewhere, right? It's not fully public, but it's public enough, unfortunately, right? But going back to the password reset scenario, one example that I've seen that works pretty well, assuming that the company has MFA, like, okay, you need to reset your password, go through MFA, right? I'm like, okay. And now you need to reset MFA. You know what? Get on a live feed with IT, show your ID next to your face. It's like, assuming you use Zoom or whatever else, or in person, right? But you had to do some additional validation. I don't see that so much about the ML AI, but it's more about the threat landscape continues to evolve, and not because we have been doing something in the past, let's just do it, keep doing it. Let's evaluate it. Is this something that we need to go change? So, and with ML AI also, it's a continue change and evolution. You were going into the differential privacy aspect, right? But it continues to evolve and change. I remember when differential privacy it came up, a lot of insights on how it work and limitations. And it's not a walk in the park. People assume, oh, we have differential privacy, so we're good, but it's not so much a walk in the park. It's hard
You can get it wrong,
to do it right.
Mhm.
And one other thing I want to touch on data leakage, and we can go to the differential privacy. I'm sorry, second time I'm doing this, so I apologize.
All part of the same.
When you're using a model, right, the information that you put into a model doesn't automatically imply that it's used for training. Okay, so usage versus training, it's important to distinguish. Sometimes people assume it is, right? If you're using ChatGPT, there is a setting you need to go click as a regular user. Okay, I don't want my data to be used for training and whatnot, right? Etc. We made an announcement last week on MoveLM, our large language model. We're not using customer data for training as well. But it's important to distinguish the two, because today, from my experience interacting with customers and other people, are thinking, oh, every time I enter something, the bot is learning, the machine learning model is learning, which is not necessarily the case. It depends on what settings and how that material gets used. So just I want to touch on a data leakage angle just to clarify those two aspects, and we can go on to differential privacy.
Yeah, I think that ties really well, because it's a lot of people have assumed, I think there's a lot of hype that if I put something into these systems, that it's going to be used to train the next model, and it's going to be trivial for it to leak. And I know this not to be necessarily true if the model's using a secure architecture and design, and the team that cleaned the data used like differential privacy techniques and k-anonymity techniques. And I'd love to hear like from Emily, I know that you have like expertise in this area. How can the team that's responsible for training the model mitigate the risk of data leakage?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the idea of deciding, what data are you using for training is obviously kind of a first one, right? You can't leak data that you're not using. I do see that someone in the audience did say like, hey, I have a fine-tuned or custom model that is trained on a lot of data, and you might find that some sensitive data was accidentally included. And so you can decide kind of first at your training data curation step if you want to do any filtering at that point, with manual human annotation or other things. But what we do is we mask all of our data as the very first step. So we use GPT-4 and other machine learning models to detect and mask any sensitive data that is going into our training data sets. If we are training a model that is based on, like a fine-tuned model that is based on customer data. And the next piece is to do, so the idea of differential privacy is basically giving someone plausible deniability that their data was included in a training data set. And so it's not necessarily saying that there is no sensitive data in this data set. It's saying that there is no way for me to attribute this sensitive data to an individual or an individual company, or like a group. It gives you the ability to say, there's no way that can be me. And so the goal with differential privacy is to add sufficient noise to your data set in order to basically perturb what is in it, so that you can just still get all of the same kind of utility and patterns out of it when you're training your model, but you're not able to then be able to extract like specific data from that model and attribute it to an individual. So differential privacy is a great tool. It's something that we're investing in a lot at MoveWorks. We did make the statement that MoveLM is not trained on any customer data, but we still have, as we've mentioned, a lot of other models. And so we want to be able to get to this point to say none of our models are trained on like raw customer data. Everything is differentially private. And so that's really where we're building towards. And differential privacy is a great step to get you there. But it's still very early days. Like I was talking with another privacy engineer last night, and we were like, hey, this has only really been around in practice for 5 years. And if you think about things like GDPR, like that has only been alive in practice for 4 years. Like we are at a very new stage. And so there's a lot of kind of development that's going on here in a lot of these places as well.
I think those are excellent points, and I think that's important for people that are going to use these systems to understand, or CISOs. So I'd love to hear, like, if you didn't work as the CISO of my workstation and didn't know all the work that goes into protecting customer data at an AI company, what questions would you have for a vendor? Like, I think it comes down to how much do you trust your vendor. It's just another SaaS provider at the end of the day. Who cares if they use machine learning or not? How much do you trust them to handle your data? And I'd be curious as well to hear your opinions on synthetic data being used to train models. But maybe we can touch on, like, what should a CISO ask a vendor to in general, even maybe especially for an ML company. But I think that's like a side point to just how do you trust your SaaS providers?
Yeah, the way I look at it, it's the data. It's the new oil, right? Using that terminology, and from there is, okay, how are we using the data? What is the data life cycle, right? Going back to what Emily stated, it are you training with my data? And in some cases, there's some of the models that we train are customer specific, right? So for those, I'm like, okay, yeah, that should be fine. Who has access to the data? Going back to what Emily stated around data masking, right? The other one that comes up, and we have probably all experienced this nowadays, you're on some chat platform and somebody accidentally types their password there, right? We have all seen that. Okay, what about if you do that on the bot? I mean, or whatever, what happens, right? Can that be deleted? We have those capabilities built in, but whoever is the SaaS vendor, do they have the capabilities to delete that as well? It's from my perspective, it's a lot more of just understanding what happens with the data. And some companies like, oh, I want an on-prem offering so everything stays within and whatnot. I'm like, does that give you much guarantees to some extent? Yes, no. I mean, we are a cloud only offering, and we work with Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 including. So, from that perspective, it doesn't mean because you have on-prem you're better off. I'm not going to say from a security perspective, the fact that you might need to update software and whatnot, it becomes a bit of a headache. So I'll pause there. So it's not so much, oh, it's on-prem, so I feel better, right? Then there's the other thing that I've seen around, and I'm not going to go in this rant, BYOK, right? Oh, okay, BYOK. So what about auditing capabilities? What audit and logging capabilities do you have that I can see and determine what is your product taking action off, right? We provide those, by the way. But those are, in my mind, the type of questions that are key, focusing heavy on the data, auditing capabilities and whatnot. And within that context, do you feel that gives you the right level of risk? And for the most part, when we engage with customers, once we have the conversations, education around how our models work, how we use the data, etc., then it's like, okay, seems fine, right? But that's what I have seen.
That's great. I think we are coming up on time. I don't know if there are any other questions that the audience had. I think we covered some amazing topics here. We covered kind of availabilities issues. We covered the difference between discriminative versus generative model security. We covered data poisoning and unintentional, as well as other types of data poisoning and overfitting issues. We got a chance to learn about data leakage and differential privacy. And if we had time, I was going to take us into prompt injection. Maybe I would love to have you back for like a part two one of these, maybe in a few months, and maybe there's even other topics that are top of mind at that point for everyone involved. Did we have any other questions?
Yeah, there's a few in the chat. I think one that is a good maybe high level one to end on was like, what do we feel the top three security concerns are that a company should think about when they're adopting AI. And I think there's a huge difference between adopting AI yourself in-house versus like going with a trusted AI vendor. Like when we think about a model by itself, there's none of these kind of controls around it, right? There's no grounding to prevent hallucination. There's no kind of the controls around what it can query, where like you need to have something where you're deploying a model in a secure environment with all of these like associated controls to help with things like harmful content even, right? Like you don't want your model to, you need a toxicity filter. So all of those things, I think when you think about if I want to adopt AI myself within my company, it is not a small feat, right? You have to create a secure training data location. You have to think about how are you going to securely develop and deploy these models? How are you going to prevent rogue querying of these models? How are you going to build all the infrastructure around it? And so I think that there's all of these security concerns that could take, its own thing for deploying it yourself. Whereas I think when we think about kind of those top concerns about adopting AI from a vendor perspective, it's a lot more of the things that Damien was touching on of saying, is this vendor, it's the same evaluation you do of any vendor. Is this vendor handling my data the right way? Does this vendor have the right deletion processes? Is this vendor compliant with the right privacy policies? And do they really get the gravity around the fact that this is a new technology, and with any new technology comes new attack vectors? And something that I've been trying to do is like, you think about web security is something that we've had around for 20 years and we're getting to this stage of maturity. How do we think about building out that same set of like canonical attacks and things that you can ground your head in as a security team from the AI perspective and say, hey, a confused deputy attack can be kind of thought of similar to server-side request forgery, and this is why, and this is how you can think about connecting the knowledge you already have with this new space. And so I think that's where like security teams already have that attacker mindset. So like reading and learning about the technology and thinking about how can I apply some of those same principles of trying to escalate privilege, trying to break authentication into this new space.
Great points. I also hope that the teams that are embracing this are really mapping their business requirements, their security objectives, and really thinking through what resources this is going to take from a time, people, and monetary perspective. It's going to be significant, especially like you said, Emily, if you're building your own models from scratch rather than just integrating with third-party provided models. We actually have some resources on a slide that I think can hopefully answer a lot of other follow-up questions, including like, what our perspectives on how to test these systems, our perspectives on what common findings will be, what specifically MoveWorks' journey has been from like architecture, design, and implementation, and the risks of deploying these in a production enterprise environment. So hopefully the audience finds these helpful, and I would love to keep talking with you. I feel like we could talk all day, but maybe we save something for a future session together.
Sounds great. Thank you, Rob, for having us. Really, really appreciate it. And if folks have questions, we can continue the discussion offline. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.